The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers through the air. It was the kind of day that seemed tailor-made for love, joy, and new beginnings. Guests began arriving at the picturesque, outdoor venue, marveling at the elegant decorations. White chairs were arranged in neat rows facing a beautifully decorated archway adorned with cascading roses and greenery. Strings of fairy lights hung delicately from nearby trees, shimmering softly as if they had been kissed by sunlight. Emily stood inside a small tent set up for the bridal party, adjusting her veil one last time before stepping out. She looked radiant in her flowing gown, her eyes sparkling with excitement and nerves. Her bridesmaids fussed around her, making sure every detail was perfect, from the placement of her hairpins to the subtle shine of her lip gloss. Despite all the preparation, Emily couldn't shake off a faint feeling of unease. Something about today felt different, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Meanwhile, Ryan paced nervously near the altar, tugging at his collar as he waited for the ceremony to begin. His best man tried to calm him down with jokes, but Ryan's mind kept drifting back to earlier conversations with his father, Mark. A quiet man, with calloused hands and a warm smile, Mark had always been Ryan's rock. He'd worked tirelessly as a mechanic to provide for his family after losing his wife when Ryan was just a boy. Now, standing here on this important day, Ryan felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude toward his dad. But he also felt protective, because he knew not everyone saw Mark the way he did. Across the lawn, Emily's parents mingled with guests, exuding an aura of sophistication. Patricia, Emily's mother, wore an expensive designer dress that caught the light with every step she took. Her husband, Richard, matched her elegance in a tailored suit. They were a striking couple, accustomed to commanding attention wherever they went. As they greeted friends and distant relatives, Patricia scanned the crowd, her sharp gaze landing briefly on Mark. She tilted her head slightly, taking in his modest appearance, a simple navy blue suit paired with scuffed shoes, and frowned almost imperceptibly. Patricia leaned closer to Richard, whispering something under her breath, though no one else could hear her words. The slight smirk playing on her lips hinted at disapproval. Richard gave a non-committal nod, clearly more interested in sipping his champagne than engaging in petty judgments. Still, Patricia wasn't satisfied. She prided herself on maintaining appearances, and seeing someone like Mark, a man whose life was so far removed from their polished world, made her uncomfortable. As the clock ticked closer to the start of the ceremony, tensions simmered beneath the surface. The atmosphere was filled with polite chatter and forced smiles, but there was an underlying tension that even the chirping birds couldn't mask. Emily's younger cousin accidentally bumped into Mark while running past, spilling a bit of juice on his sleeve. Mark chuckled good-naturedly, brushing it off with a wave of his hand. "No harm done," he said warmly, ruffling the child's hair. Yet Patricia watched the scene unfold with thinly veiled disdain, muttering loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Some people really don't understand proper etiquette." Her comment rippled through the group like a stone thrown into still water. A few guests exchanged awkward glances, unsure whether to laugh or change the subject. Others pretended not to notice, focusing instead on admiring the floral arrangements or checking their watches. Meanwhile, Ryan, who happened to be within earshot, clenched his fists momentarily before forcing himself to relax. He loved his fiancée deeply, but dealing with her parents had never been easy. And now, with the most important day of his life unfolding before him, he wondered how much longer he'd have to endure their condescending remarks. For now, however, the show went on. Ushers guided guests to their seats, musicians tuned their instruments, and the photographer snapped candid shots of smiling faces. Everything appeared to be proceeding smoothly, yet beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. Little did anyone know, the events of this day would take a dramatic turn, one that would leave everyone talking long after the final dance ended. As the pre-wedding reception buzzed with energy, guests moved between tables laden with gourmet appetizers and crystal glasses of sparkling champagne. The atmosphere was festive, yet there was an unspoken tension simmering beneath the surface, a quiet undercurrent that only a few could sense. Emily's parents, Patricia and Richard stood near the center of the gathering, their presence commanding attention. Patricia, in particular, seemed determined to make her opinions known, even if only through subtle glances or carefully worded comments. Patricia's gaze swept across the room, landing on Mark once again. He was seated at a table toward the back, chatting amiably with some distant relatives of Ryan. His suit, though clean and pressed, lacked the tailored refinement of the outfits worn by most of the other guests. To Patricia, this was more than just a fashion oversight. It was a reflection of what she perceived as his inability to fit in with their social circle. She turned to Richard, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the hum of conversation. "Honestly, I don't know how someone like him managed to raise a son who ended up marrying into our family," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "Did you see him earlier? That plain tie, those scuffed shoes, it's almost embarrassing." Richard shifted uncomfortably, glancing around to ensure no one else had overheard. "Patricia, maybe we shouldn't," he started, but she cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Oh, please. You're too soft sometimes. If people can't dress appropriately for such an occasion, they shouldn't expect to blend in." Her words hung in the air, sharp and biting, as she reached for another glass of champagne. Nearby, Emily noticed her mother's disapproving expression and felt a pang of unease. She adored Ryan and admired his father deeply, knowing firsthand the sacrifices Mark had made to provide for his family. But confronting her mother now, on her wedding day, felt impossible. Instead, she tried to focus on the positives, the laughter of children playing nearby, the sweet aroma of fresh pastries being served. But Patricia's attitude was hard to ignore. The situation escalated moments later when Mark, attempting to join in the festivities, leaned forward to grab a piece of bread from a shared plate. In doing so, he accidentally knocked over a glass of red wine, spilling it onto the pristine white tablecloth. The clink of the glass against the porcelain drew immediate attention, and several heads turned toward him. Patricia's reaction was instantaneous. "Well, this is just perfect," she announced, her voice loud enough to carry across the room. "Some people simply have no idea how to conduct themselves in polite company." Her words landed like a slap, silencing nearby conversations and drawing uncomfortable stares. Mark froze for a brief moment, his face reddening as he fumbled for a napkin to clean up the mess. "I'm so sorry," he muttered, his voice tinged with embarrassment. "Let me fix this." But Patricia wasn't finished. "Perhaps next time, you'll think twice before bringing certain habits into settings like these," she added, her lips curling into a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. The room grew eerily quiet, save for the faint rustle of fabric as guests shifted uncomfortably. In their seats, some exchanged sympathetic looks while others quickly averted their gazes, unwilling to get involved. Emily, standing nearby, felt her cheeks flush with anger and shame. How could her own mother behave this way on such a special day? Ryan, who had been speaking with his best man nearby, overheard every word. His jaw tightened as he processed what had just happened. Taking a deep breath, he excused himself and strode toward the table where Mark sat. Kneeling beside his father, he placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, Dad," Ryan said softly, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Then, turning to face Patricia, he straightened up and addressed her directly. "Mrs. Carter," he began, his tone calm but firm, "I understand that you may not agree with everything about my family, but my father has worked harder than anyone I know to give me a good life. Without him, I wouldn't be here today. And honestly, I'd take his values over appearances any day." Patricia blinked, momentarily caught off guard by Ryan's boldness. For once, her perfectly rehearsed responses failed her, and all she could manage was a stiff nod. Richard cleared his throat awkwardly, stepping forward to diffuse the tension. "Let's not let this ruin the celebration," he suggested weakly, though his attempt at diplomacy fell flat. Mark, still holding the damp napkin, forced a small smile. "Thank you, son," he whispered to Ryan, his voice thick with emotion. Then, without another word, he rose from his seat and quietly exited the tent, leaving behind a room full of uneasy silence. As the minutes ticked by, the mood remained subdued. Guests resumed their conversations hesitantly, though the earlier carefree spirit had vanished. Emily watched her mother closely, noting the flicker of guilt that crossed her face before she masked it with indifference. Meanwhile, Ryan clenched and unclenched his fists, struggling to contain his frustration. What had seen? Ryan's confrontation with Patricia left the room buzzing with tension, though most guests tried to mask their discomfort by sipping champagne or engaging in hushed conversations. Emily, torn between her love for Ryan and her loyalty to her parents, felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She glanced toward the entrance of the tent, hoping to see Mark return, but he was nowhere to be found. Her heart sank as she realized how deeply his feelings must have been hurt. Determined to make things right, Ryan excused himself from the awkward gathering and stepped outside to look for his father. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the venue, painting the landscape in golden hues. Ryan scanned the area, his eyes finally landing on Mark sitting alone on a wooden bench near the garden. Mark's shoulders were slumped and he stared at the ground, twirling a small twig between his fingers. It was clear that Patricia's words had struck a nerve. "Dad," Ryan called out gently as he approached. Mark looked up, forcing a weak smile when he saw his son. "Hey, kid, shouldn't you be inside enjoying your big day?" "This is my big day," Ryan replied firmly, taking a seat beside him. "But it doesn't feel right without you there. I'm sorry about what happened back there. What Mom said, it was completely uncalled for." Mark sighed, brushing a hand through his graying hair. "Don't apologize for her, Ryan. Your mom is entitled to her opinions, even if I don't agree with them. And honestly, I've dealt with worse over the years, you know that. But this isn't just worse," Ryan insisted, his voice rising slightly. "This is supposed to be a celebration, a happy day for us, for our families. Instead, she treated you like you didn't belong here, and that's not okay. You've done nothing but support me my entire life, Dad. Everything I am today is because of you." Mark placed a reassuring hand on Ryan's shoulder. "I appreciate that, son. But sometimes people like your mother-in-law-to-be judge others based on things that don't really matter, like clothes or jobs or where someone comes from. They forget that character is what truly counts." Ryan nodded, his jaw tightening, as he thought about Patricia's behavior. "Well, they're going to have to learn, because I won't stand by and let anyone disrespect you. Not today, not ever." Just then Emily appeared, her dress swishing softly as she hurried toward them. Her face was flushed, and her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together. "Ryan, Dad, I'm so sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "I can't believe my mom acted that way. She had no right to speak to you like that." Mark offered her a kind smile, despite the weight of the situation. "It's all right, Emily, these things happen. I'm sure your mom didn't mean any harm." Emily shook her head vehemently. "No, it's not okay. What she said was cruel, and I'm ashamed of how she behaved. Please come back inside. We need to fix this, for all of us." Before Ryan could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance of the venue. A sleek black car pulled up, its engine purring softly as it came to a stop. The driver stepped out, opening the door for a tall, muscular man wearing sunglasses. Guests craned their necks to get a better look, whispering excitedly among themselves. "Is that? Oh my goodness, it is," one guest exclaimed, pointing toward the newcomer. The man removed his sunglasses, revealing a familiar face that sent shockwaves through the crowd. It was none other than Vin Diesel, the Hollywood action star known for his larger-than-life persona and iconic roles. Dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket, he strode confidently into the venue, drawing gasps and murmurs from everyone present. Patricia, who had been nursing her third glass of champagne, nearly dropped it in astonishment. "What on earth is he doing here?" she muttered under her breath, visibly flustered. Richard tugged at his collar, equally bewildered. Even Emily and Ryan exchanged puzzled glances, unsure whether this was part of some elaborate prank. Vin Diesel, however, seemed unfazed by the attention. He greeted a few curious guests with a warm smile before making his way toward the main tent. His presence instantly shifted the mood, turning heads and sparking excitement. No one could figure out why he had shown up uninvited. But whatever. The reason, it was clear that this wedding was about to take an unexpected turn. As Vin approached the seating area, his gaze swept across the room, lingering briefly on Patricia, whose cheeks flushed red under his scrutiny. Then, with a nod toward Ryan and Emily, he took a seat near the front row, leaning back casually as if he owned the place. The tension that had hung heavily over the event moments earlier now gave way to curiosity and anticipation. Whatever Vin Diesel had planned, it was bound to leave a lasting impression, and perhaps change the course of the evening entirely. The arrival of Vin Diesel sent ripples of excitement through the crowd, transforming the previously tense atmosphere into one of intrigue and wonder. Guests whispered to each other, speculating about why such a famous actor would show up unannounced at a small-town wedding. Some assumed he was a distant relative or friend of the couple, while others wondered if this was some elaborate publicity stunt. Patricia, still reeling from her earlier behavior, seemed particularly flustered, fanning herself with a napkin as she tried to compose herself. As the ceremony began, everyone took their seats, but all eyes remained on Vin Diesel. He sat casually in the front row, his sunglasses now tucked into the collar of his leather jacket, exuding an air of quiet confidence. The officiant started the proceedings, welcoming the guests and speaking about love, commitment, and unity. But just as Emily and Ryan were exchanging vows, something unexpected happened. Vin stood up. At first, people thought he might be leaving early or heading backstage for some reason. Instead, he walked calmly toward the microphone set up near the altar. The officiant paused mid-sentence, looking confused but polite as Vin stepped forward. Clearing his throat, Vin flashed a disarming smile before addressing the crowd. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the venue. "I know my being here is, well, let's call it unexpected. But I promise you this isn't a prank or anything like that. I'm here because I wanted to share a story about the man sitting right over there." He pointed directly at Mark, who looked stunned, his mouth slightly agape. Murmurs rippled through the audience as all heads turned toward Mark, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Emily and Ryan exchanged bewildered glances, unsure what to make of the situation. Even Patricia leaned forward, her curiosity overtaking her earlier disdain. "A few years ago," Vin continued, "I was driving through the middle of nowhere when my car broke down. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever had a breakdown in the middle of nowhere, but let me tell you, it's not fun. No cell service, no gas stations, nothing. Just me, my broken-down car, and a whole lot of frustration." He paused, for dramatic effect, letting his words sink in. That's when Mark showed up. He was passing by in his truck, towing a trailer full of tools. When he saw me stuck on the side of the road, he didn't hesitate. He stopped, rolled up his sleeves, and got to work. It took him hours, but he fixed my car and refused to take any money for it. Vin's tone softened as he recounted the memory. You see, Mark didn't care that I was a celebrity or that I could have paid him handsomely for his help. All he cared about was doing the right thing. That kind of humility, that willingness to help without expecting anything in return, it's rare these days, and honestly, it left a lasting impression on me. The crowd listened intently, captivated by Vin's storytelling. Even Patricia, who moments ago had dismissed Mark as unworthy of respect, found herself leaning closer, her expression softening as she absorbed his words. But it wasn't just the act itself, Vin went on. It was the way Mark carried himself, with kindness, dignity, and grace. Those are qualities we should all admire, regardless of someone's background or circumstances. Too often we judge people based on superficial things, what they wear, where they come from, or what they do for a living. But true character? That's what matters most. His gaze swept across the room, landing briefly on Patricia before moving on. And today, seeing Mark here with his son, watching the kind of man Ryan has become, it reminds me of the importance of family, hard work, and staying grounded. These are values worth celebrating, especially on a day like this. By the time Vin finished speaking, the entire venue erupted into applause. People cheered and whistled, moved by his heartfelt tribute to Mark. Emily wiped away tears, clutching Ryan's hand tightly, while Mark himself looked overwhelmed, shaking his head in disbelief. For the first time that day, the tension in the air dissolved, replaced by warmth and admiration. Patricia, however, sat frozen in her seat, her face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and regret. She glanced at Richard, who gave her a pointed look, silently urging her to reflect on her earlier actions. As Vin returned to his seat, the officiant resumed the ceremony, but the energy in the room had shifted entirely. What had started as a tense and uncomfortable event now felt like a celebration, not just of Emily and Ryan's love, but of the values that truly mattered: kindness, humility, and forgiveness. As the newlyweds sealed their vows with a kiss, the crowd, As the ceremony concluded and guests made their way to the reception area, the buzz of excitement over Vin Diesel's unexpected appearance showed no signs of fading. People gathered in small clusters, replaying his speech and marveling at how it had shifted the entire tone of the day. Emily and Ryan took countless photos with friends and family, but every so often they'd glance toward Vin, who stood chatting casually with a group of awestruck guests. His presence was magnetic, drawing people in with his easy charm and larger-than-life personality. Meanwhile, Patricia sat stiffly at her table, her champagne flute untouched. She couldn't shake the weight of Vin's words, or the lingering guilt that had settled heavily on her shoulders. The actor's tribute to Mark had been heartfelt and sincere, painting a picture of a man she hadn't bothered to understand. Now, as snippets of conversation floated around her, guests praising Mark's humility and kindness, she felt increasingly isolated. Richard tried to lighten the mood by making small talk, but even he seemed distracted, stealing glances at Mark's table as if weighing his wife's behavior against the events of the day. It was during the reception toast, however, that Vin truly turned the spotlight back onto Patricia. As the meal wound down and dessert plates were cleared away, the best man stepped up to give his speech. He joked about Ryan's quirks and shared funny stories from their college days, earning laughter from the crowd. But just as he was wrapping up, Vin rose from his seat once again, signaling for the microphone. "I hope you don't mind me cutting in," Vin said with a grin, his voice warm and inviting. "But there's something else I need to say before this night goes on." The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on him. Even the waitstaff paused mid-step, trays in hand, eager to hear what he would say next. "Earlier, I talked about Mark and the kind of person he is. But now, I want to address something else, something we've all experienced in one way or another." Vin's tone grew serious, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling firmly on Patricia. "We live in a world where people are quick to judge others based on appearances, wealth, or status. It's easy to look down on someone because they don't fit into our idea of success. But let me tell you something. Those judgments reveal more about us than they do about the people we're judging." Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. She knew, without a doubt, that Vin was speaking directly to her. "I've met plenty of celebrities, politicians, and wealthy individuals who thought they were better than everyone else," Vin continued. "And guess what? Most of them lost my respect because of it. Arrogance doesn't win hearts, it pushes people away. On the flip side, I've met mechanics, teachers, and everyday folks who've shown me more kindness and wisdom than anyone in Hollywood ever could." He paused, letting his words sink in. Then, turning slightly toward Patricia, he added, "Today we're celebrating two families coming together, not just Emily and Ryan, but all of you. And if we can't treat each other with basic decency and respect, then what's the point of all this?" The room was utterly silent, save for the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze outside. Patricia's face flushed crimson, and she avoided meeting anyone's gaze. Nearby, Emily reached for Ryan's hand, squeezing it tightly, as tears welled up in her eyes. Even Richard looked visibly moved, nodding slowly as if silently agreeing with Vin's message. Mark, seated a few tables away, stared at Vin with an expression of quiet gratitude. He hadn't expected anyone, let alone a global superstar, to defend him so passionately. Yet here was Vin Diesel, standing tall and unapologetic, using his platform to highlight the importance of treating others with dignity. When Vin finally handed the microphone back to the MC, the room erupted into applause. This time the clapping wasn't just polite, it was thunderous, filled with admiration and respect. Guests cheered, some even rising to their feet, while Vin gave a modest wave before returning to his seat. As the music started up again and couples began heading to the dance floor, the mood felt lighter, almost cathartic. Conversations resumed, but now they revolved around Vin's speech and its powerful message. Several guests approached Mark, offering handshakes and compliments, while others whispered apologies to Ryan for earlier tensions. Patricia, however, remained rooted in her seat, her mind racing. For the first time in years, she found herself questioning her own beliefs about class, status, and the assumptions she'd held for so long. The evening was far from over, but already it was clear that Vin Diesel's surprise visit had sparked a moment of reflection that none of them would soon forget. As the reception carried on, the atmosphere had transformed completely. The tension that had loomed over the event earlier was replaced by a sense of unity and reflection, thanks in large part to Vin Diesel's powerful words. Guests mingled more freely now, their conversations animated and light-hearted. The dance floor filled up as music pulsed through the air and laughter echoed across the venue. Yet amidst the joy, one person remained visibly uneasy. Patricia. Sitting alone at her table, Patricia stared blankly at the sparkling lights strung above the dance floor. Her champagne glass sat untouched beside her, beads of condensation rolling down its side. She couldn't shake the weight of Vin's speech, or the way his gaze had seemed to pierce straight through her. Every word he'd spoken replayed in her mind like a loop she couldn't escape. "Arrogance doesn't win hearts," he'd said. Those simple yet profound words struck a nerve, forcing her to confront the truth about her own behavior. Nearby, Emily noticed her mother's distress. For most of the evening, Emily had been torn between anger and pity for Patricia. While she resented how her mother had treated Mark, she also knew that Patricia wasn't a bad person, just someone who often let pride cloud her judgment. Taking a deep breath, Emily decided it was time to address the situation head-on. She excused herself from Ryan's side and approached Patricia cautiously. "Mom," Emily began softly, pulling out a chair to sit beside her. "Are you okay?" Patricia hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line before she finally spoke. I don't know, sweetheart. This whole day has been—" Her voice trailed off and she sighed heavily. "I feel ashamed." Emily reached out, placing a gentle hand over her mother's. "It's not too late to fix things, Mom. You know Dad would say the same if he were here right now." Patricia glanced toward Richard, who was chatting with some distant relatives near the dessert table. He caught her eye briefly and gave her an encouraging nod, silently urging her to make amends. It was clear he agreed with Emily, even if he hadn't voiced it outright. Summoning what little courage she had left, Patricia stood up slowly, smoothing out her dress as if preparing for battle. "Where is Mark?" she asked quietly, scanning the room. "He's over there," Emily replied, pointing discreetly toward a quiet corner where Mark was speaking with Vin Diesel. The two men appeared deep in conversation, occasionally laughing at something shared between them. Seeing Mark smile so warmly only made Patricia feel worse, but it also steeled her resolve. With hesitant steps, Patricia crossed the room, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. As she approached, both men turned to look at her, their expressions unreadable. Mark's smile faded slightly, replaced by a guarded politeness, while Vin raised an eyebrow, watching intently. "Mark," Patricia began, her voice trembling. "May I speak with you for a moment? Alone?" Mark exchanged a glance with Vin, who gave him an approving nod before stepping aside. Patricia led Mark to a quieter part of the venue, away from curious ears. Once they were alone, she took a deep breath and met his gaze directly. "I owe you an apology," she said, her tone sincere. "What I said earlier, about your suit, about everything, it was wrong. I judged you unfairly, and I'm truly sorry. You've done nothing but show kindness today, and I acted like a fool." Mark blinked, clearly surprised by her admission. For a moment he didn't respond, simply studying her face as if trying to gauge her sincerity. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that, Patricia. It means a lot. I meant what I said earlier too, about wanting to blend in. Patricia continued, her voice softening. But I realize now that blending in isn't nearly as important as being genuine. And you, Mark, you're one of the most genuine people I've ever met. A small smile tugged at the corners of Mark's mouth. We all make mistakes, Patricia. What matters is learning from them. Thank you for coming forward. That takes courage. Relief washed over Patricia's face, and she managed a faint smile in return. Thank you for forgiving me. I hope we can start fresh, for Emily and Ryan's sake, if nothing else. Of course, Mark replied warmly. Family is family no matter what. As they returned to the main area, the crowd seemed to sense the shift in energy. Patricia rejoined Richard, who wrapped an arm around her shoulders supportively, while Mark walked back to Vin, who gave him a knowing grin. Looks like my work here is done, Vin quipped, earning a chuckle from Mark. The rest of the evening unfolded with renewed warmth and camaraderie. Even Patricia found herself joining in, the festivities, laughing alongside guests, and even sharing a... As the evening unfolded, the atmosphere at the wedding continued to shift in remarkable ways. The earlier tension had dissolved entirely, replaced by a sense of unity and warmth that seemed to radiate from every corner of the venue. Guests who had once whispered awkwardly about Patricia's behavior now laughed openly, their conversations flowing freely as if a heavy cloud had been lifted. Even Patricia herself appeared visibly lighter, her rigid posture softened, her usual air of superiority giving way to something more genuine. Humility. Mark, for his part, carried himself with quiet dignity, accepting compliments and handshakes from guests who approached him throughout the night. Some praised him for his grace under pressure, while others simply thanked him for being such a kind presence amidst the chaos. What struck everyone most was how effortlessly he forgave Patricia, without holding on to bitterness or resentment. His ability to rise above the situation inspired those around him, including Emily and Ryan, who watched their families come together with growing hope. The turning point came during the father-son dance, a tradition typically reserved for the bride and her father, but adapted for Ryan and Mark on this special occasion. As they stepped onto the dance floor, the crowd erupted into applause, some even rising to their feet. Mark looked slightly nervous at first, unused to being the center of attention, but Ryan smiled reassuringly, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. You've done so much for me, Dad, Ryan said softly as they swayed to the music. Tonight's for you. Mark's eyes glistened with emotion, though he managed to keep his composure. I couldn't be prouder of the man you've become, son. You've got your mother's heart and my stubbornness, a perfect mix. Their heartfelt moment brought tears to many eyes, including Emily's, who stood nearby holding hands with her own father. Richard, too, seemed moved, patting Mark on the back when the song ended. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the newfound respect forming between the two men. Meanwhile, Patricia made an effort to mend fences beyond just apologizing to Mark. She sought out Ryan next, pulling him aside during a break in the festivities. Her voice trembled as she spoke, betraying the vulnerability she rarely allowed others to see. Ryan, she began, hesitating before continuing. I owe you an apology as well. I was wrong to speak to your father the way I did. It was disrespectful, and I'm deeply sorry. Please know that I value him and you more than I showed today. Ryan studied her face for a moment, searching for sincerity. When he found it, he nodded slowly. Thank you for saying that, Patricia. It means a lot, not just to me, but to Dad too. He deserves better, and so do we all. Patricia's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if a weight had finally been lifted. You're right, she admitted, and I promise to do better moving forward. For Emily, for you, and for our family. Word of her apology spread quickly among the guests, adding another layer of warmth to the celebration. By the time dessert was served, people were buzzing, not only about Vin Diesel's surprise appearance, but also about the unexpected display of forgiveness and reconciliation. Several couples took turns sharing stories of their own struggles and triumphs, turning the reception into a shared moment of connection and vulnerability. Even Vin Diesel, who had quietly slipped away after ensuring his message was heard, left, behind a lasting impression. Before leaving, he posed for photos with the newlyweds, signed autographs for excited children, and shook hands with nearly everyone present. His final words to Mark before departing summed up the spirit of the evening. Perfectly. Keep doing what you're doing, man. The world needs more people like you. By midnight, the party reached its peak, with guests dancing under the stars and enjoying one last round of toasts. Emily and Ryan cut the cake together, feeding each other bites amidst cheers and laughter. Nearby, Patricia joined in the fun, surprising everyone by grabbing Richard's hand and twirling him across the dance floor. For the first time all day, she looked genuinely happy, her earlier anxieties replaced by a newfound sense of peace. As fireworks lit up the sky to mark the end of the celebration, Emily and Ryan stood side by side, watching the colorful bursts reflect off the faces of their loved ones. They exchanged glances, silently acknowledging how far they'd come, not just as individuals, but as a blended family learning to embrace one another despite their differences. In that moment, surrounded by forgiveness, love, and unity, it became clear that this wedding wasn't just about them. It was a reminder that even the deepest divides can be bridged when people choose kindness over judgment, understanding over pride. And as the final sparks faded into the night, everyone knew they'd witnessed something truly extraordinary, an unforgettable celebration that would stay etched in their hearts forever. As the final fireworks faded into the night sky, leaving trails of shimmering light that seemed to linger in everyone's memories, the wedding reception began to wind down. Guests gathered their belongings, hugged one another goodbye, and made their way toward the parking area, still buzzing with excitement over the evening's events. The air was filled with laughter, heartfelt farewells, and promises to stay in touch, a testament to how much the day had brought people together. Emily and Ryan stood near the entrance, thanking each guest personally as they left. Their faces glowed with happiness, not just because of the perfect celebration, but also because of the deeper connections they'd witnessed between their families. Patricia, who moments earlier had been twirling on the dance floor with Richard, approached the newlyweds with a warm smile, a stark contrast to her earlier demeanor. "You two were absolutely radiant today," she said, pulling Emily into a tight hug. "I couldn't be prouder to call you my daughter, and you, Ryan, are already part of the family." Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotions she'd kept bottled up for so long. Ryan smiled, nodding appreciatively. "Thank you, Patricia. That means more than you know." Nearby, Mark chatted with Richard, the two men sharing stories about their own wedding days and swapping advice on marriage. It was remarkable to see them laughing together, considering how differently the day had started. As the conversation paused, Richard extended his hand to Mark, who shook it firmly before pulling him into an unexpected embrace. "It's never too late to start fresh," Richard said warmly, patting Mark on the back. "And I think we've got a lot to learn from each other." Mark chuckled softly. "You're right about that. Here's to many more celebrations ahead for all of us." Meanwhile, Vin Diesel's surprise visit remained the talk of the night. Though he had quietly slipped away earlier, his impact lingered in every corner of the venue. Guests recounted his speech with admiration, marveling at how he'd turned what could have been an awkward moment into something transformative. A few even joked that having a Hollywood star crash your wedding might become the new standard for unforgettable ceremonies. As the last guests departed, Emily and Ryan took a quiet moment to themselves, walking hand in hand through the now empty venue. Fairy lights twinkled above them, casting a soft glow over the scattered remains of the celebration. Empty champagne glasses, crumpled napkins, and flower petals strewn across the ground. It was messy, imperfect, and utterly beautiful. "Can you believe everything that happened today?" Emily asked, leaning her head against Ryan's shoulder. From the insults to Vin showing up, it felt like a movie. Ryan laughed softly, squeezing her hand. "Yeah, and somehow it all worked out. I think this day taught us something important. No matter what challenges come our way, we can face them, as long as we stick together." They stopped beneath the archway where they'd exchanged their vows earlier, gazing up at the stars. For A brief moment. They allowed themselves to reflect on the whirlwind of emotions they'd experienced, from the tension of Patricia's harsh words to the joy of reconciliation and forgiveness. It wasn't the flawless fairy tale they'd imagined, but it was real, raw, and deeply meaningful. Back inside the tent, the cleanup crew worked efficiently, packing away decorations and folding chairs. But amidst the hustle, Patricia lingered, for a moment, running her fingers along the edge of the table where she'd sat during the tense pre-wedding reception. She exhaled slowly, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. This day had forced her to confront parts of herself she'd rather ignore, but it had also given her a chance to grow, to let go of pride and embrace humility. The next morning, as the sun rose over the quiet venue, Emily and Ryan woke up in their honeymoon suite, exhausted yet exhilarated. They scrolled through photos taken throughout the day, reliving each magical and challenging moment. One picture stood out: Vin Diesel standing beside Mark, both men grinning broadly as if they'd known each other for years. Beneath it, someone had written, "Proof that kindness wins." That simple phrase encapsulated everything the couple hoped to carry forward into their married life. They knew there would be ups and downs, disagreements and misunderstandings, but they also knew they had the strength to overcome them, together. Months later, when friends and family gathered again for holiday dinners or casual get-togethers, the story of the wedding